Okay.
Who are you?
Wait, how do you pronounce it again?
Bird Quest, just like
Bird.
iceberg.
Okay, it's not. Did you press it, Papa?
Yeah, it's recording now.
Okay. Hi, my name is Mia Mammon, and I'm here with Chief Rodney Bergquist. We are in Vallejo, California, and it is April 5th, 2015. So my first question is, where are you from?
Actually, I was born and raised in Minnesota, and most people don't realize, but Minnesota is cold country. I delivered newspapers from 20 below zero. So when Janice says, my wife, who is from California, when she says it's cold in the morning at 40, I don't relate to it being cold at 40.
So do you have any siblings?
I have two sisters. One passed away at 55, and my other sister lives in Michigan. And we talk every 5 years or so. We're not close, but and that was mostly because as teenagers, they hang around with their friends, and I hung around with my friends.
So when you enlisted, it wasn't that hard for you to leave your family?
It really wasn't. I was sort of looking to get away from the hot summers in Minnesota. Actually, it was very contrary to just the opposite. In the winters, it was extremely cold. In the summers, in August and July and August, it was very humid, hot and humid.
So why did you join the Navy?
I joined the Navy because, well, first of all, when you watch war movies and you see these Army people running around living in foxholes and eating canteen and little canned food and trying to sleep with all that, no niceties. And then I started thinking about the Navy has hot shower and food, hot food and stuff like that. But the real reason I joined was because I wanted to see what other countries are like. And, now that I look back after I've retired, I look back and think that, nowadays we think that everybody is exactly like we are in the United States. But actually when I went to different countries, I was able to see things that were quite different, similar. Like when I went to Australia. I went to Australia, and Australia was very much like the United States. If you ended up being dropped into Sydney, and you were blindfolded, and you took off your blindfold, and nobody talked to you, you would think you were in the United States.
Because all that's different is their accents?
Is their accent, yeah, it's the only thing that's different.
Where else did you go?
I also, I got to experience going to Japan, Sasebo, Japan, and Yokosuka, Japan. And I had an interesting experience in Japan where a lot of times when you go shopping as a sailor, when you get into a port, you can only go as far as your feet will take you to walk to the local strip, where they are selling different things and some local bars and things like that. Unless you would take a cab and go somewhere, or if you know somebody, who's going to pick you up and take you to their home. So anyway, because I always thought that you were getting ripped off, which we were, when you bought stuff on the local visitor section, right when you get off the ship, all the ports have a local area
For tourists?
for tourists, yeah. And so I decided I was going to go into the local economy and buy something and not get ripped off. So I took a cab to the local mall in Yokosuka. And so we got to the mall, the cab let me out, I went to the inside the mall, went up the elevator, went to the second floor, was looking around for what I wanted, and I was looking for a kimono, but I didn't see it. So anyway, so I saw a sales lady, so I just walked over to the sales lady and I said, I'm looking for a kimono. And she looked at me and I looked at her, and I realized at that point that she didn't speak English. And so it had never dawned on me, just being sort of naive, you know, being young and naive and stuff like that, it never dawned on me that someone, you know, didn't speak English.
Yeah.
And so it was sort of those realizations that you go to a different country, it's different. And so then she didn't speak English, so then she said something in Japanese. And then a young fellow came out of the back room back there that was a college kid. And then he had taken English, and so he was able to help me. But it was sort of an interesting experience to be, probably my first time to be aware that people in other countries are different. And so when you're there, you're the stranger.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you were on 3 different ships. Can you tell me about the first?
Yeah, the first ship that I went to was called the USS Henry County. It was stationed out of Long Beach. It was what they called a landing ship tank ship. And what it did is it carried tanks and Army trucks, Army, Marine trucks, cargo, things like that. So what it had was on the front of it, it had a big ramp that came down and would land on the ground. So when the ship would pull up, it could land anywhere where there was an ocean front, and it would pull up close, and then it would drop. It would drop when you're going into to land and offload trucks and equipment, tanks. It would drop its anchor out in the water
Mm-hmm.
to catch, and then it would let its anchor out as it went up to the shore, so that when it dropped its ramp and unloaded the trucks and tanks and whatever, then when everything was offloaded, then it would lift its ramp and then try to back out to sea. But if they got stuck on the shore, then they could use the anchor to pull them back by using the winch, you know, on
Yeah.
the ship stuff, and it would pull the ship back out to sea.
What was your job on that ship?
Well, that's where I first started my career, and my specialty was, well, I started as a young seaman, and I started out in the deck force. The deck force was comprised of young seamen who didn't know what they wanted to do yet. You're just there, you're new, and so you go into the part of the ship's force that maintains the ship. And so you end up doing chipping paint, you know, because when you're getting sea salt on a ship all the time, there's always areas that are becoming corroded, and you have to chip off the corrosion, chip paint in order to put on a fresh coat and stuff, because after you've had 3 or 4 coats, it starts to build up and then it starts to crack and stuff. So my job at that point was to be part of the deck force and chip paint and swab the deck. They had to swab the deck every morning before breakfast, you know, to get all that sea salt off of the paint. And so then I had to decided that if I was going to stay in the Navy, what could I do that would be different than chipping paint. So I decided that on my own free time, you have to spend time with other departments to see if there's something that you could do that you would where they needed help. Number one, first thing, the other divisions needed to have an opening where they needed help. And so then on my free time, I started hanging out with the shipfitters, which in civilian life would be called a plumber. And so we were down in the bilge area, you know, in the bottom of the ship, you know, and in the engine room, one of the pipes was leaking water, and it was like 4 inches deep or something like that. And my shoes were standing in this water, and my shoes were soaked and stuff like that. And he's working on all this pipe, and he's going to have to replace the pipe. But it didn't take me too long. Even though I was young and naive, it didn't take me too long to realize that, no, this is something I wouldn't want to just do for a long time. So I decided that I would look around the ship and see if there was other jobs that I'd be interested in. And so one night one morning, I was walking around, and I noticed I was looking in this area that had like a cage, stuff like looking in there, and there was these people at that time. They were called storekeepers, and that's what I ended up being. But they were storekeepers sitting in there, and they had their feet propped up at about 8:15 in the morning, and they were drinking coffee, and they had donuts there, you know. And so they were eating donuts and had their feet propped up, and I said, well, no, that looks like something I could adjust to. And so, anyway, so I started hanging out with the storekeepers, and their job was to order all of the things that needed to be replenished on the ship. Majority of it was repair parts, you know, just like your local auto store, AutoZone or something like that. But it's ship's parts. And so all these parts are stored on the ship, and when somebody needs to repair something, then they would come and ask you if you have that part stored in one of your lockers, and then you would look at your stock battery or your stock cards and say, yeah, we got 3 of them, they're in this location, you would go get it. Or they would fill out a document to request it, then you would go get the part, give it to them, they would sign the document. Then the document would go into would be posted to the card, -1, and then it would go into the reorder or replenish file. And so that ended up being what they did. But in order to identify other things where you didn't have a number or something like that, then you'd have to take a part number to catalogs and look through catalogs, or look through microfilm and try to cross this manufacturer's part number and stuff to get a Navy stock number. And then you would then use the Navy stock number to replenish through the supply centers ashore. And so anyway, so that ended up being my initial job.
So you had that job on your second shift too?
Yes, and after I left the LST, then I went to a large aircraft carrier. It had 4,000, the USS Coral Sea had 4,000 people on there when we were deployed. It had 2,000 when we were stateside. And the difference were the 2,000 on there is the regular ship's crew, and then when you add 2,000 for the air wing, which supports all the aircraft on there, so they have their own crews that do all the maintenance and fly the plane and maintain all the aircraft stuff, and then the regular crew maintains the repair parts for fixing the propulsion plant and all the ice cream machine and all the cooking stuff and everything like that. But one of the interesting things was we had like 28,000 repair parts, different repair parts on there. So it would be like a very big AutoZone, you know, like we have here. And we had like 58 storekeepers. So, you know, and something like 28 different storerooms with repair parts in them. But the one thing we learned quickly on there was that there were just some items you didn't want to issue to people. And so at night when you had duty and somebody would come in and hand you a requisition for something, you could look at the requisition and you knew immediately that it was an issue that you wished you didn't have to make. And that was the one that always stuck out. Well, there's 2 of them that stuck out in mind. One was rags, but the other one was paint. And the paint was stored 7 decks down. And each deck has hatches on them with big dogging things on them. And so you'd have to undog these hatches and lift it up, and it'd take 2 people on some of these hatches to lift them up and then lock them in place. Go down to the next depth and undo the hatches and lift them up, and go down 7 decks, get this 5-gallon can of paint.
And carry it back up.
Huh?
And then carry it back up.
And then me and somebody else then would have to, it would take 2 people to go get the paint. And then you would have to use a rope and stuff like that, and then lift it up to the next level and then go back up and again. So, but anyway, well, and one of the things, like I had said, that it was interesting that when you were on the LST, the little ship, and you ordered toilet paper, you know, maybe you would have like, maybe 8, 10, 12 cases of toilet paper, you know, for the crew to go out for 3 weeks or something like that. But on an aircraft carrier, you know, when we pulled into port, you know, there would be like maybe three semi-loads of toilet paper for, you know, to load on board. So when we pulled into port to get supplies, everybody else went on liberty, and us storekeepers were there loading, you know, 8, 10, 12 semis of stuff, you know, loading them to the aircraft carrier and putting them in all the storerooms and stuff like that. But anyway, the aircraft carrier was probably exciting from the standpoint that at night I would go up on the high 07 level and watch them do flight ops at night, and watching the aircraft take off, and you know, the jets.
Yeah.
And then when they would come into land, it was kind of cool, you know.
Where was that ship stationed?
That ship was stationed out of San Diego, and we went we went to Hawaii twice. I mean, well, went to Hawaii a couple times, and then but probably the most exciting was when I went to Australia, Singapore, Sasebo, Japan, Yokosuka, Japan. So that was part of my experience of wanting to join the Navy. See, I never got to see those countries had I not joined the Navy.
And then the third ship was actually a submarine?
Yes, and then I had a desire. I thought submarines, it just sounded cool to me being on a submarine. And of course, when you see things on, you know, if you see commercials and things like that, you know, it just looks like it would be cool. And of course, so being fairly good in my rate, being a storekeeper, I had thought about maybe applying for submarines, but I never got around to doing it. So after 4 years on the aircraft carrier, it was time for me to rotate ashore for 2 years. And in my particular field, you spend 5 years at sea and you get 2 years shore duty. So I was looking forward to, after my 5 years, well actually I spent 6 years on the Coral Sea. So I was looking forward to going to shore duty.
Mm-hmm.
And so then when I was working at the weapons station in Charleston, and I just started my shore duty, I decided to get a part-time job, and so I got a job at the Officers Club as a bartender. And because it was the Officers Club, it had all the higher-ups in the Navy. And so I ran into a captain from one of the submarine squadron that was there having some drinks, and so he asked me if I had ever thought about going into submarines. And of course, yeah, I thought about it. I didn't know if I'd qualify or not, but I had thought about it several times. It did interest me. He said, well, if you're interested, he said, you know, we need people in your field. We need storekeepers on submarines. We're short storekeepers. So if you're interested, I can help you get in. So then, of course, then you start having these thoughts, you know, about, wow, maybe I could actually get into the submarines. And so he had one of his yeomen's, you know, people who did the office work, put together all the paperwork, and then one day it showed up on my desk on shore duty and said, fill out this paperwork, and when you get it filled out, call this person, and this person will process this paperwork for you to give you, get your paperwork going for getting into the submarine port. And so I fill out the paperwork, turned it in couple 3 days later. Then I get another thing back, says we've made an appointment for you over at the hospital. You need to go over and get a physical check to go into the submarine port. So then I went over and got my physical. And then but I'm thinking that I just been on shore duty for 4 months, and so I'm thinking it's going to take them a long time to process this paperwork. You know, paperwork goes slow in any system, and so I'm thinking that you know, by the time I get done with my 2 years shore duty here, then it probably get processed. But this captain that I had talked to at the officers club, he had the people that worked for him process this all the way through the Navy system. And it was like only 6 weeks later, they come back and issued me orders to the submarine that was down the pier. Just, you know, just like 3 or 4 miles away. And so my shore duty was gone, and I'd only got to be on shore duty for 6 months.
So how long did you serve?
I spent 21 years in the Navy, and I really enjoyed it.
Yeah. What were some of your benefits?
The probably the biggest benefit, you know, I was like most people. You spend 4 years in active duty, and you want to get out, go back to civilian life, and do the things you did as a, you know, in your own hometown and whatever. But my parents always encouraged me that, you know, you need to stay in the Navy as long as because you enjoy the Navy. And you know, the Navy was easy for me because I was a rule follower. I always did what people told me to do, and I wasn't a troublemaker, and I didn't try to go outside of the guidelines. And so the Navy was really easy for me. But what everybody told me was, you know, hey, they have a great retirement program in the Navy, and that is that you can retire in 20 years. So he said, if you go in at 20, when you're 40-something, 40, 41, 42, 43 years old, you can retire with a, you know, retirement check. Said not very many people actually have that opportunity.
Yeah.
And so that's why I decided to stay in. And then the second reason was obviously I didn't understand at the time, but it's turned out to be a great benefit now that I'm retired, and that is medical benefits. Is you can get all you can't get your some of the medical benefits you can't get at the hospital because they have all the active military people there. But us retirees, the Navy has a program to where they contract it out to provide us full benefits. So all of our medical is taken care of for me and my wife, and so that's really a great. Turned out to be a significant benefit that I probably didn't. I'm sure I didn't realize when I was younger.
Okay. And one of my last questions is, what rank did you achieve?
I made E7, which, you know, it's sort of like maybe 80% as high as I could have went. And actually, I guess I hadn't thought about it before, but one of the reasons, probably one of the reasons I didn't get hired was because of something that happened in high school that I didn't realize at the time. But I didn't do very well in math. And so when I didn't think much about it when I was in high school, you know, I'm not going to get out and do math anyway. But it turned out that every time I wanted to go up for promotion, there was a lot of math on tests. And so what I didn't like when I was in high school turned out to be my problem.
Yeah.
Because I didn't overcome it in high school and have somebody help me and teach me math to how to understand it better. So when I got into to going up for these promotions, it always had math on it, and I couldn't do math. I mean, I just didn't understand it. So it turned out holding me back a little bit, but I got as high as I could achieve for the knowledge that I had and my performance.
Okay. Well, thank you for letting me interview you. Oh, do you want to show the pictures?
Well, I can. This was the first.
I'll hold this one up too.
This was the first ship I went to, which was, like I say, was the landing ship tank, and it was loaded with all military cargo, tanks and trucks and everything that the Marines and Seabees and stuff needed to go ashore and build bridges or build buildings and stuff like that in support of the war efforts. And this one was the big aircraft carrier I went to, the USS Coral Sea, and I spent 4 years on the Coral Sea, and I really enjoyed it. So I had a really versatile career because I went from a small ship to a big ship, and then I ended up on a submarine, USS George Washington. I spent 6 years on this submarine, and one of the things that I didn't mention, we don't run out of time here, the one thing that I did on the submarine was every time we issued repair parts and all this food was stacked in front of these lockers, and every time I had to issue a part, I'd have to go down and move about 16 cases of food off to the side so I could get in my lockers and issue this 2-set O-ring. And so then I'd have to put the 16 cases back in front of the lockers and tie them down. And it didn't take me too long to figure out that as soon as I get in my bunk and go back to sleep, they'd come back and they'd wake me up again and they'd say, hey, we broke that O-ring, we need another one. And so I'd have to go back down to the same location and move those 16 cases of food again to get in that locker to get a second O-ring. And so it didn't take me very long to figure out that every time I issued a part out of the bottom lockers, that I would relocate it to the top locker.
Yeah.
And so after 2 years, about 97% of my issues were all out of the top locker. And so that's why I ended up staying on the George Washington for 6 years, because they offered me a transfer to another submarine. But I knew that I would have to start moving all those
Yeah.
parts again. So it didn't take me too much thinking to decide that, no, I'd fix this one, I want to stay here. So I stayed on here for 6 years.
Are you you're in this picture, right?
Huh?
You're in the picture?
I am in this picture. Actually, I was there when they were talking about when we were in Hawaii, and the Arizona Memorial was in the background there. And they were talking about that the Navy was going to fly over and take a picture of our submarine today. And I happened to be phone talker for the captain on the bridge. And so there I was in the middle on the day when we took that picture for the George Washington. And we've seen this picture in Navy books at
Wow.
Barnes and Noble and stuff.
Wow, that's cool.
Oh.
Okay. Thank you.